My name is Alice. I'm currently parked on this faded sofa, trying to stitch together the mess that my so-called family life turned into. You know, before all this, I was living the typical 9-to-5 grind. I mean, marketing isn't exactly a thrill ride, but it was my thrill ride. Enter Jack. Dear old Jack. We were college sweethearts. That's what they call it, right? We did the whole dance, meeting at some random party, him spilling his drink and charming me with his red-faced apologies. Fast forward, love blooms, and marriage seemed like the right next step. He was some hotshot coding genius, had a nice gig as a software engineer. And things were sweet, smooth even. Then Charlie happened. Our little bundle of sleepless nights and toothless grins. So, I hung up my marketing hat and decided to go all in on this housewife gig. That meant I had more time to start picking up on the nuances of Jack's moods, especially when Linda, the Lord Almighty mother-in-law, rained down her opinions via Skype. Never met her in person, but damn, she sure did like to make her presence felt from a few hundred miles away. You need to put your foot down, Jack. Linda's voice would slice through the speakers. A man's home is his castle, and don't you forget it. I'd see how Jack's eyes shifted, shoulders squared like he was gearing up for war. After the call, he became a different guy. If I left a mug on the counter or dared to sit down before the clock hit acceptable by his newly acquired standards, boy, would I get it. It's not a hotel, Alice. You see that? That's a dish out of place. His words felt like cold steel, not the Jack I knew. Jack would flip from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde and back before you could say schizophrenia. But it wouldn't stick. Once Linda's echo faded, I'd get my Jack back. On this particular Tuesday, Jack had that look in his eyes, that unnerving glint that always showed up post-Linda. He ambled into the kitchen, my domain, and leaned against the fridge with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Hey, babe, you need to pick up the pace around here. Mom said. I cut him off, hands deep in dough. If Linda says jump, we asking how high now? Not funny. She's right. We won't raise Charlie in a mess. I mean, look at this place. I followed his pointing finger around our perfectly tidy kitchen. The nerve of him. I thought about giving Jack a piece of my mind, but my mother always said to pick my battles, and with Jack on a Linda-fueled bender, it didn't feel like a winnable war. Suddenly, the sound of Linda's screechy tone popped from the living room. Another Skype alert. My stomach dropped. Come on, Alice. It's Mom. Watch the attitude. My eyes nearly rolled out of my skull. I wiped my hands and prepared to face the screen, our digital overlord. And there she was, in all her pixelated glory. Alice, dear, I see you're busy, but remember, Jack works hard. Keep that home nice for him, won't you? I gritted my teeth. Of course, Linda. Nothing but the best for your boy. Jack flashed me a warning look, like be nice or else. But as Linda carried on about her expectations, I swear I felt something in me start to crack. Would this ever end? Or was I destined to live under the thumb of a woman who wasn't even in the room? On a Thursday that felt like any other, with Charlie fussing in my arms and the smell of yesterday's dinner still haunting the living room, Jack came out with it. We're spending Christmas with my mom in her house, he said, not even looking up from his phone. I paused, Charlie's pacifier halfway to salvation. Christmas there? With Linda? The words were sour, just hanging in the air. Jack finally glanced up, eyebrow raised. Yep, good for the family and all that. High time they all met Charlie, don't you think? Pulling at the edge of my shirt, already spotted with who knows what, I frowned. But Charlie's so young, and I'm not up for a road trip, especially in December. He shrugged, scrolling through something undoubtedly important. Babe, it'll be fine. A bit of cold won't hurt him. Besides, Mom's already planning the whole thing. Heat flared up in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. Doesn't sound like a question, Jack. Did you even consider my say in this? Come on, Alice. It's not up for debate. This is what families do. They get together for the holidays. I shot him a look that could have burned toast. And usually, they ask, not announce, I snapped. He pocketed the phone and came over, trying to play peacemaker. Hey, I know it's sudden, but think about it. Could smooth things out with Mom. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. Smooth things out? You mean playhouse the Linda way or no way? Jack winced. That's not fair. You know how much she's been bugging me about visiting. I handed him Charlie, who seemed hellbent on testing his lungs. She's not the one who has to pack up an infant and deal with your family's drama. Jack bounced Charlie on his knee, a whisper of a smile on his face. It'll be like an adventure. You love adventures, remember? That's when the mom glare I'd been perfecting hit him full force. Adventures don't involve feeding schedules and diaper bags. But Jack had that determined look that spelled trouble. We're going, Alice. End of discussion. I let out a long sigh, nerves frayed. Fine, but hear this, Jack. We're not going there to be pushed around. I'm serious. He nodded, but there was a trace of something else there. And I won't remember saying yes to this kind of look. And you're gonna help, right? With the packing, the baby, and dealing with your mom? Yeah, of course, he said, though he was already picking up his phone again. With a defeated grunt, I moved to start making a list of what to take. Booties, blankets, and the battle gear needed to survive a week with Linda. The moment we stepped into Linda's house, a looming structure that seemed straight out of a ghost story with its creaky floorboards and chilly drafts, I knew we were in for a ride. A sea of faces turned our way, Jack's aunts and uncles, cousins by the dozen, and the venerable queen herself, Linda, holding court. Her eyes skimmed over me like a scanner, resting on our sleeping Charlie, wrapped snug in his blanket. There's my grandbaby, she exclaimed, her arms outstretched, with a warmth that almost felt real. But as she lifted her gaze to meet mine, the temperature could have dropped 10 degrees. Alice, she nodded, begrudging respect at best. Jack cleared his throat. Mom, thanks for having us. The room was buzzing with relatives chatting and the scent of cinnamon and pine. But the festive cheer didn't reach Linda's eyes when she turned back to me. Hope the drive wasn't too terrible. Roads can be unforgiving this time of year. It was all right, I returned with a tight smile, clutching Charlie a little closer. Well, let's not stand here catching a chill. Alice, Linda continued, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. I would really appreciate it if you could take the lead getting the place shipshape for Christmas. Jack shot me a desperate play nice look while I struggled to find words. Me? But, I've got Charlie too. Linda waved a hand dismissively. Oh, there will be plenty of hands eager to dote on the boy. Besides, I've seen your Instagram. You've got a knack for this sort of thing. My Instagram, the place where I posted meticulously filtered photos of our home that hid the chaos of reality? I gritted my teeth and forced another smile. I guess I can give it a go. A look of approval crossed Linda's face, one that didn't reach her eyes. So I dug into box after box of holiday decor, feeling more like Cinderella than a welcomed guest. Jack's family was a loud chorus of advice and backseat decorating, all while passing Charlie around like the season's hottest toy, a living, breathing doll for them to coo over. Jack vanished into the belly of the house, with only the odd shout of "How's it going there?" or "Mom says the garland should go higher," to remind me he was still there. By the time dinner rolled around, the grand old house glittered and shone like something out of a fairy tale where the fairy godmother had taken the day off and left Cinderella to do all the work herself. At the table, loaded with more food than the whole neighborhood could eat, Jack raised his glass in a toast. To family, he said, smiling. I caught a wink he sent his mother's way. I tried to match their cheer, but fatigue had long since taken the wheel. Jack noticed, but not with the sympathy I needed. You could have put a bit more tinsel up, he remarked offhandedly between bites. Mom noticed. After a long night chasing the elusive spirit of Christmas at the behest of Linda's pointed directions, all the while keeping a smile plastered on my face for the sake of holiday peace, I retired to our room. Next day I found Jack in what they called the den, but it was more like a wild man cave where Christmas seemed to have thrown up. There he was, sprawled on the couch, a beer in one hand, eyes glued to some game on TV. The sound of sports commentators filled the room. "Jack, we need to talk." My voice was firm, louder than I intended. He glanced up, annoyed at being interrupted. "What's up now?" "It's about yesterday, about everything since we got here." "I'm tired, Jack. And I feel alone in all this." The words spilled out. He scoffed. "Alone? With all my family around? Come on, Alice. You've got to toughen up. This is the big leagues." "I'm not talking about numbers, Jack. Look, your mom, she's piling everything on me, and where are you? Off the grid the second any work pops up." He rolled his eyes. "Not this again. Just do what she says, Alice. That's how it works around here. You'll live." Frustration boiled over. "I'm not one of your mom's robots, Jack. I'm your wife, and I'm asking for your help. It's like you don't get it." He let out a laugh. "Help? What do you want me to do? Decorate cookies? Hang tinsel? That's kid stuff. Just stick it out." His words stung. "Kid stuff? Really? Because last I checked, we're a family too. Or is that kid stuff as well?" Jack stood up, his face getting redder. "Watch your tone, Alice. Don't start something." The room felt smaller, the walls closer. "Start something? No, I'm finishing it, this conversation and your damn free ride." "What's your deal, Jack? Too good to help out your own wife?" He moved towards the door of the den. "I've had enough of this. You knew what you were getting into when you married me. Remember that?" I followed him. "Yeah, I remember. Promises. Support. Respect. Heard of them?" But he was already out the door, leaving me talking to a room full of silent trophies and blinking lights. The next day, there wasn't much change. The family was all over the place, and I was still the designated workhorse. Jack avoided me, getting tight with his cousins, laughing too loud over beers and football. I worked, hardly speaking to anyone, especially not Jack. I was too angry, too worn out. And Charlie, bless him, seemed to sense the tension, becoming fussier with each passing hour. In the middle of a diaper change, Charlie crying and clutching at me, one of Jack's aunts walked in. She didn't knock, just barged in with a bucket of soiled linen. "Here you go. Add it to the laundry when you can." I looked at her, then at the laundry. "I can't right now. Can't you see?" She raised her eyebrows, surprisingly bold. "It's just laundry, dear. Plus, that's what you're here for, isn't it? To help out?" I straightened up, holding Charlie tight against my chest. "Just because I married Jack doesn't mean I'm the family maid." She frowned, her own patience wearing thin. "Don't be so sensitive. We all do our part here." "Yeah. When's Jack's turn?" Her face turned sour. "Jack? He's catching up with family." "Catching up?" My voice rose over Charlie's cries. "Is that what you call it?" She left without another word, but her message was clear, this was on me. I was on my own. I had to shove my way through the crowded store on Christmas Eve, grabbing whatever was left on the shelves. Didn't matter much what it was, anything could be turned into a Christmas dish with enough butter and salt, or so I figured. My phone was buzzing in my pocket the whole time, probably Jack or Linda wondering where I'd got to. But I was too frazzled to answer. Back at the house, I lugged the grocery bags through the snow, my arms about to fall off. Nobody came out to help, of course. I dumped the bags in the kitchen and rolled up my sleeves. The turkey wasn't going to cook itself. The oven felt like a furnace on my face, the heat mixing with my frustration into a kind of steam. As the gravy simmered and the pie crust started to brown, I felt my head spin. I took a seat for a quick breather. Linda stumbled upon me as if I'd planned it, her face twisting into a scowl. "What's this? Just sitting around while there's work to be done?" Before I could gather my wits to answer, Jack appeared behind her, his tone sharp. "Yeah, Alice, what's the deal? We got a timetable here." "I just needed a second," I said, the room tilting a little. "I'm not feeling too." "Oh, save it." Linda cut me off. "This family needs team players, not weaklings. If you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't be here." Jack didn't say a word in my defense, just stood there nodding like a puppet. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I wouldn't let them see. "I'm not weak," I shot back, pushing up from the chair. "And I don't need this crap, not from you or anyone." Jack's face grew hard. "Watch it, Alice, or you'll be out of here so fast." He let the threat hang between us, heavy as the smell of roasting meat. I bit back a sob, threw on the apron, and turned back to the stove. They left, satisfied that I'd been put in my place. But later that night, after the plates were licked clean and the presents opened, after the laughter and the carols had quieted down, I lay in bed, the silent tears finally falling. They thought I was the weak one, but it was them, all of them. Weak for not helping, weak for not seeing, weak for not caring. Christmas dinner was set up like some kind of fancy spread you'd see in a magazine, except there was one thing off: my seat. It was away from the main table, like I had some sort of disease. I could hear them all, the clinking glasses and the loud laughs from where I was put. I sat there for a moment, staring at the untouched plate. A dry turkey slice stared back at me, the cranberry sauce bleeding into the stuffing like a bad joke. That's when I knew I was done. Finished playing pretend. Charlie was upstairs, asleep in one of the guest rooms. No way was I going to have my kid grow up thinking this nonsense was normal. I stood up, my chair screeching against the floor, louder than I expected. I didn't care. I went upstairs, packed the bags I'd been living out of for what felt like forever, zipped up Charlie's little backpack with his favorite toy and the picture book we read every night. Downstairs, the laughter ticked up a notch. They didn't even see me hauling our lives out of there in 2 trips. The walk to the train station was brutal, the cold cutting through my coat. But each step tugged a little something off my shoulders, a weight I didn't want to carry. At the station, it was empty, the kind of quiet you only get when everyone's at home. I sat there on the bench, Charlie bundled up beside me. "No more of that for us, Charlie," I whispered to him, hoping he was dreaming of something nice, something simple. "Just you and me now." The train rolled in, a lonely hunk of metal that blew hot air out the sides. I picked up Charlie, still asleep, and stepped inside the warmth. The clang of the closing door marked the end of an era as I lugged my bag out of what used to be home. The small bundle that was my baby dozed quietly in my arms, blissfully unaware of the turmoil surrounding us. It was just the 2 of us now, heading into the great unknown. I remember stuffing onesies and diapers haphazardly into the bag. There were no pictures taken off the walls. No second looks. Just the essentials for him and a few clothes for me. Every grab, every zip, felt like a tiny rebellion. Pulling into my parents' driveway was like stepping into a world paused at the brink of joy. They rushed out, my mom's arms wide, my dad's face split with a grin beneath his old, faded cap. "Alice, baby, come in. It's freezing out here." Mom smothered us in one of her bear hugs, the kind that could squeeze the sorrow straight out of your soul, while Dad took care of the bag and the base for the baby carrier. The warmth of the house hit me like a mug of hot cocoa. They had the Christmas tree twinkling, the lights blinking in a slow, sleepy pattern. We settled into the living room, and before I knew it, my mom had a steaming plate of food in front of me and a stocking filled with baby rattles and teething rings. It felt unreal. Laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the thick silence I'd escaped. The baby stirred in arms, and I kissed him, promising silently that it was going to be different. We were just about to toast, the clink of our glasses ready to sing, when my phone rang, jarring against the melodies of Jingle Bells. I checked the caller ID, Jack. Hello? Alice, where the hell are you? It was Jack, his voice a cocktail of anger and confusion. At my parents'. Where else would I be? I said, not missing a beat. There was a pause, and then, you need to come back. This isn't your home anymore. I snorted, the laughter bubbling up from deep within, genuine and loud. You're joking, right? I'm done with being treated like I'm invisible until you need something. Don't be dramatic. Just get back here. Everyone's asking about you, the dishes are piling up, I cut him off. Look, listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once. I'm filing for divorce. Got it? I'm not your unpaid maid, Jack, never was. I don't know what made you think I was. The other end of the phone was silent. Then, the dial tone buzzed in my ear. He'd hung up. Mom was looking at me, eyes wide. I hung up the phone and met her gaze straight on. I should have done that years ago, I said. You're staying here tonight, Mom said, solid and sure, the way she'd said things when I was a kid and the world was too big and scary. Yeah, I agreed, feeling the truth in her words. Yeah, I am. Charlie's laughter filtered through from the other room. Let's go celebrate Christmas, I said with a trembling smile. And with the click of the phone, I sealed the decision in the pocket of my jeans, and stepped back into the warmth of the living room where the promise of a peaceful night hung gently in the air, a stark contrast to the storm I had just weathered. Waking up to the same old ceiling crack had become kind of a comfort. The kitchen was already buzzing when I came down. Mom was at the stove, and Dad was half buried in newspaper at the table. Charlie was making a go at a slice of toast, more crumbs decorating his lap than making it into his mouth. Morning, I mumbled, grabbing the pot to pour myself some coffee. Before I got the chance to take a sip, the phone was blaring its old ring from the wall. Dad's eyes met mine. With a hint of a smirk, I answered it, knew who it was before I even said hello. Alice, darling, I need you to come back. Jack's voice came through, half pleading, half like he was ordering a pizza. A man needs his wife. I need you to take care of things here. I almost choked on air, the laugh came out so hard. Jack, honey, you lost the right to need anything from me. But nothing, Jack. I'll send over the divorce papers by the end of the week. You can take care of yourself, or find someone else to boss around. Have a nice life. And with that, I hung up. Mom was staring at me, one eyebrow raised. Everything all right? She asked, a knowing look on her face. Couldn't be better, I said, finally taking that sip of coffee. It was bitter, strong, and hot, just how I needed it. As weeks turned into months, that new chapter in life I'd opened became less about what I'd left behind and more about what was ahead. Divorce papers were signed, delivered, and done with. My bank account got a little heavier with the first round of alimony checks, child support Jack called it, but let's be real, it was guilt money. Either way, it was for Charlie, and that's all that mattered. The job hunt wasn't easy, wasn't hard either. Just a truckload of maybes and a handful of not. One day, sitting at the kitchen table with the want ads, I couldn't help but wonder if begging for jobs was just begging to go back to a life like the one I had with Jack. No, that wasn't for me, not anymore. Why the long face? Dad asked, scrunching up his own as he looked over at me from his chair. Just thinking about work, or the lack of it. You'll find something, he said. You got more backbone than half the blokes at the factory. They should be begging you to work, not t'other way round. That night, with Charlie snoozing away in his crib, I lay awake a little longer than usual, the house quiet except for the distant sound of Mom and Dad talking softly downstairs. Maybe it wasn't the new start I'd imagined, with a new place of my own and a sparkling career. But it was solid ground under my feet. It was my family, my boy, and a future that was mine to shape. No more of Jack's dark clouds on my horizon, no more dancing to someone else's tune.
I was standing in the kitchen, the phone pressed against my ear, disbelief washing over me in cold waves. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harper, your mother passed away." The voice on the other end, a doctor from Chicago General Hospital, sounded distant, like a faint echo in a long, empty hallway. "My mother?" I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. The room spun, and I gripped the countertop for support. Last week, we had talked about her coming over for Thanksgiving. She was fine then. How could this be? I had to tell Martin. He had been working in Europe for the past 3 months, and communication had been sparse, but he needed to know. I dialed his number, my hands trembling. After several rings, he answered. "Martin, it's Elaine. My mom, she passed away." There was a pause, and then his voice, devoid of warmth, came through. "Oh, I see. Look, Elaine, I'm really tied up right now. I've got a trip planned with the guys to Barcelona. Can't really skip it." His words hit me like a physical blow. "You're not coming back? Not even for the funeral?" I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Elaine, you know how it is with my job. I'll be back in a couple of months. Just handle things there, okay?" And without waiting for my response, he hung up. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, feeling a hollow emptiness growing inside me. My mother was gone, and the man I had spent 20 years with couldn't care less. The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements and condolences, a relentless march of reality that I navigated like a ghost. It was on the 3rd day, in the midst of this, that I received another call that seemed to stop time altogether. It was Martin's brother, Alex. "Elaine, there's been an accident. Mom and Dad, they're gone." The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. Martin's parents, too? It felt like some cruel joke, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I called Martin, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left message after message, each one more desperate than the last. I couldn't go to his parents' funeral. Without Martin, I was just an outsider, a reminder of the son who couldn't be bothered to show up. The thought of their empty seats, an unspoken accusation in the air, was unbearable. As the days passed, I found myself sitting alone in the house we had built together, surrounded by memories that now seemed like lies. I thought back to how we met, introduced by our fathers who were old college friends. It had felt like a fairy tale then, our families joining together in a bond of love and friendship. But as the years went by, the fairy tale had slowly faded. Martin was always busy, always absent. His work was his life, and I, along with our son Peter, were just fixtures in his world. When Peter was 10, my father passed away. My rock, my confidant, gone. Martin had been away on a business trip then, too. I was left alone to deal with the grief, to support our son, to keep the family together. And now, with both our families shattered, I was alone again. Our marriage had become a routine of loneliness and resentment. I was the homemaker, the silent supporter, while Martin was the absent provider. But was he really providing, or just running away from a life he no longer wanted? I tried to remember the last time we had laughed together or shared a moment of genuine connection. But all I could see was the growing distance between us, a chasm filled with unspoken words and unmet needs. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I realized that this wasn't just about his absence. It was about the lack of respect, the lack of empathy. It was about a marriage that had become a hollow shell of what it once was. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I knew that something had to change. I couldn't live in this shadow any longer. The days following the funerals were a whirlwind of silent houses and unanswered calls. I tried to reach Martin again, but it was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. That's when the memories began to creep in, unwelcome and unbidden. I remembered our early days, how Martin's charm and ambition had swept me off my feet. We were young, in love, and the world seemed full of possibilities. But as years passed, the man I fell in love with started to fade, replaced by someone consumed by work and his own needs. I was pulled from my reverie by a knock on the door. Standing there was Alex, Martin's younger brother. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usual cheerful demeanor nowhere in sight. "Elaine, I can't believe he didn't show up. Not even a call," he said, his voice heavy with grief and disbelief. "I know, Alex. I've been trying to reach him, but..." Nothing. Alex shook his head, his anger palpable. "You know, Elaine, there's something deeply wrong with him. Mom and Dad deserved better. You deserve better." His words struck a chord in me. deserve better. The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing it from someone else made it real. It wasn't just me feeling this way. Elaine, if you need anything, just let me know, okay? Alex offered before he left, a hint of worry in his eyes. That night, as I lay in bed, the house eerily quiet, I realized how much of my life I had dedicated to a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenience. The love, the support, the sacrifices, it was as if they meant nothing to him. A mixture of anger and resolve began to build within me. I wasn't going to be the silent, suffering wife anymore. I needed to find out what Martin was up to, what was so important that he couldn't even show up for his own parents' funeral. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I hired a private investigator. It was a drastic step, but I needed to know the truth. The PI was a middle-aged woman named Sarah who had a no-nonsense air about her. "We'll find out what he's up to," Sarah assured me. "It won't take long." True to her word, within a week, Sarah came back with information that shattered any illusions I had left about Martin. Photos and reports of him with another woman in Barcelona, looking carefree and in love. As I looked at the photos, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just a business trip. This was a betrayal of everything our marriage was supposed to stand for. I confronted Martin over the phone. His response was a cocktail of excuses and deflections. "Elaine, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a work thing." "A work thing? Is that what you call this?" I countered, my voice shaking with anger. "You wouldn't understand. It's complicated," he snapped back, his voice cold and distant. I realized then that I was speaking to a stranger. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, was gone. In his place was someone who saw me as nothing more than a hurdle to his desires. That night, as I lay awake, the weight of my decision heavy on my chest, I knew there was no going back. Martin had made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. I would no longer be a prisoner in my own life. The days after discovering Martin's betrayal were a blur of anger and disillusionment. Each morning, I awoke to the stark reality of my solitary struggle. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with the silence of betrayal. I busied myself with the mundane tasks of daily life, but my mind was elsewhere, consumed with thoughts of Martin's deceit. The images from the investigator's report haunted me, a constant reminder of his infidelity. One evening, as I was going through old photo albums, a picture of our wedding day caught my eye. We looked so happy, so in love. I couldn't help but wonder where it had all gone wrong. Was it gradual, or had there been a specific moment when Martin decided I was no longer enough for him? My train of thought was interrupted by a call from Peter, our son. "Hey, Mom, how are you holding up?" "I'm managing, Peter," I replied, trying to sound stronger than I felt. There was a pause before he spoke again, his voice laced with concern. "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe I should come home for a while, help you through this." His offer touched me deeply, but I couldn't let him put his life on hold for me. "No, Peter, you need to focus on your studies. I'll be fine." But Peter was insistent. "Mom, this isn't just about you. Dad's actions affect me too. I need to be there for you." His determination was a balm to my wounded heart. Despite Martin's absence, Peter had grown into a caring and responsible young man. His support gave me strength, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel so alone. A few days later, Peter arrived. His presence filled the house with a much-needed energy. We spent hours talking, sharing our thoughts and feelings about Martin and the situation at hand. "It's just so selfish, Mom. How could Dad do this to us?" Peter's anger mirrored my own. "I don't know, Peter, but I do know that we can't let his actions destroy us. We're stronger than that." As we talked, a plan began to form in my mind. Martin had taken so much from us, it was time he understood the consequences of his actions. I wasn't going to be the silent victim anymore. It was time for Martin to face the music. The following week, I met with a lawyer to discuss the possibility of divorce. The lawyer, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Hammond, listened intently as I recounted the events of the past few weeks. "Mrs. Harper, based on what you've told me, you have a strong case for divorce, especially with the evidence of infidelity," she said, her tone professional yet empathetic. I nodded, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over me. This was really happening. I was taking the first step towards freeing myself from Martin's shadow. As I left Mrs. Hammond's office, a newfound sense of purpose filled me. I was no longer the woman who waited silently for her husband to return. I was Elaine Harper, and I was going to take control of my life. But as I stood there looking out at the bustling city streets, a part of me couldn't help but mourn the loss of the life I thought I had. The happy family, the loving husband, it was all an illusion, shattered by the harsh light of reality. As I headed home, I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Martin had underestimated me for the last time. The revelation of Martin's affair had set a fire within me, one that burned with the need for justice and retribution. As I sat in our living room, the walls seemed to close in on me, each family portrait a reminder of the facade our life had become. My resolve was tested one evening when Martin called. His voice, once familiar and comforting, now grated on my nerves. "Elaine, I've been thinking. Maybe I was too harsh. We should talk when I get back." His words, meant to soothe, only fueled my anger. "Talk? After everything you've done? You abandoned your family, Martin." "Elaine, you're overreacting. It's not like I planned this. Things just happened," he replied, his tone dismissive, as if his betrayal was a mere inconvenience. "Things just happened? You make it sound like you had no choice in the matter. You chose to be with another woman. You chose to ignore your own parents' funeral." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he had hung up. Then he spoke, his voice cold. "I don't have time for this, Elaine. I have important work here." That was the last straw. "Important work? Is that what you call abandoning your family? You know what, Martin? Maybe it's time I made some important decisions of my own." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. It was time for action. The next day, I met with Sarah, the private investigator. "We need more evidence, anything that can help in the divorce proceedings," I told her, my voice firm. Sarah nodded, understanding the assignment. "I'll see what I can dig up. Martin won't know what hit him." Over the next few weeks, Sarah provided me with a steady stream of evidence. Photos, emails, and even testimonies from people who had seen Martin with his mistress. It was more than enough to paint a clear picture of his infidelity. Armed with this information, I met with Mrs. Hammond again. She reviewed the evidence, her expression grim. "This will certainly help your case, Mrs. Harper. It seems Mr. Harper has been quite careless." As we discussed the next steps, a plan began to take shape. Martin had always been proud of his reputation, both personally and professionally. It was time to use that against him. "Mrs. Hammond, I want to make sure Martin feels the consequences of his actions, not just legally, but personally and professionally as well." Mrs. Hammond regarded me with a new level of respect. "I understand, Mrs. Harper. We'll make sure he gets what he deserves." When Martin finally returned home, it was to a cold and unwelcoming house. I greeted him with divorce papers, my expression as hard as the resolve within me. "Elaine, what is this?" he asked, his voice a mix of surprise and annoyance. "It's over, Martin. I'm filing for divorce, and before you try to talk your way out of this, know that I have enough evidence to ruin you." Martin's face turned a shade paler, his usual confident demeanor crumbling. "You wouldn't dare," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I dare, Martin. I dare to stand up for myself and for our son. You've made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences." As he read through the papers, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. But there was no going back. I had drawn the line, and there was no crossing it. That night, as Martin packed his bags and left, I felt a sense of liberation. The chains of our loveless marriage were finally broken. I was free to start anew, free from the lies and deceit that had bound me for so long. As I watched him drive away, a sense of justice filled me. This was just the beginning. Martin would soon learn that his actions had consequences that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The days following Martin's departure were filled with a tumultuous mix of emotions. Anger, relief, and a sense of vindication swirled within me. The house, now void of his presence, felt larger, as if it too had been holding its breath under his oppressive shadow. My resolve was tested when I received a call from Martin, his tone a mix of anger and desperation. "Elaine, you're ruining me." The divorce papers, the allegations. Do you realize what you're doing? His words were like fuel to my fire. Yes, Martin, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm showing the world who you really are. You can't do this to me. I've worked hard for everything I have, he argued, his voice laced with entitlement. Worked hard? You mean you've lied and cheated your way through our marriage? You've made your bed, Martin. Now you have to lie in it. Martin's voice rose, a crescendo of frustration and disbelief. You were nothing before me. You think you can just take everything? I felt a surge of power at his words. I was nothing? No, Martin. I was everything you didn't appreciate. And now I'm taking back what's mine. The call ended with Martin's threats echoing in my ears, but they no longer held any power over me. I was done being the victim. As the divorce proceedings began, Martin's true nature became evident for all to see. His attempts to hide assets and slander me only served to damage his reputation further. The evidence Sarah had gathered painted a clear picture of his deceit and infidelity. The court hearings were tense, with Martin's lawyers trying every trick in the book. But Mrs. Hammond was a force to be reckoned with, countering their moves with precision and finesse. Throughout it all, Peter stood by my side, his support unwavering. He had grown disillusioned with his father, the truth eroding any semblance of respect he once held. The day the divorce was finalized was a day of liberation. As the judge declared our marriage dissolved, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had won, not just the divorce, but my freedom from Martin's shadow. After the court session, Martin approached me, a shell of the man he once was. Elaine, please, we can still fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and what I saw was a man broken by his own arrogance. There's nothing left to fix, Martin. You broke everything worth saving. Walking away from him, I felt a chapter of my life closing. The pain, the betrayal, the lies, they were all behind me now. Ahead lay a path of my own making, free from the deceit that had clouded my life for so long. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the world in a warm golden light. It felt like a sign, a promise of new beginnings and brighter days ahead. I turned to Peter, a smile spreading across my face. Let's go home, son. We have a new life to start. And with that, we walked away, leaving Martin and the past where they belonged, behind us. With the divorce finalized, I was determined to reveal the extent of Martin's disgrace to those who had been blinded by his facade. I knew that true justice wouldn't come from the courts alone. It had to come from exposing him to the world. I started by reaching out to our mutual friends, people who had known us as a couple for years. The initial reactions were mixed, with some refusing to believe the truth, but I had evidence, undeniable proof of his infidelity and deceit. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. One evening, I invited a few friends over, people who had doubted me initially. As they sat in my living room, I showed them the messages and pictures Sarah had gathered. Shock and disbelief filled the room as they saw Martin's true colors laid bare. One friend, Lisa, shook her head in disbelief. I can't believe I defended him all this time. He's a monster. Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded. He fooled us all, but now you know. Lisa was the first to take action. She contacted others in our social circle, sharing the evidence and urging them to reconsider their alliances. Soon, the once seemingly impenetrable wall of support around Martin began to crumble. One by one, our friends distanced themselves from him, appalled by his actions. The same people who had once admired him now saw him for what he was, a selfish, deceitful man who had no regard for anyone but himself. As Martin's social standing crumbled, he became increasingly isolated. His attempts to salvage his reputation only made things worse, as he lashed out at those who had abandoned him. His once strong network of contacts began to disappear, leaving him with no one to turn to. I watched with a sense of grim satisfaction as the man who had caused me so much pain faced the consequences of his actions. It wasn't enough for him to lose his friends. I wanted him to lose everything. One day, I received a call from Martin's former boss, Mr. Reynolds. He had heard about the divorce and the scandal surrounding Martin. Elaine, I had no idea. I can't believe he would do such things. I sighed, my voice heavy with exhaustion. It's been a long time coming, Mr. Reynolds. Martin's true nature finally caught up with him. Mr. Reynolds paused, then spoke with a hint of regret. I'm sorry to hear about all of this, but I wanted to let you know that Martin's behavior at the company has also come to light. We've decided to terminate his employment. I felt a rush of vindication. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. It's about time he faced the consequences. As the news of Martin's termination spread, his world crumbled further. He had lost his job, his friends, and his reputation. It was a fall from grace that he couldn't recover from. But I wasn't done yet. I had one final move to make, one that would ensure Martin paid for his actions in the most significant way possible. With Martin's world in shambles, it was time for the final blow, the ultimate revenge that would ensure he paid for his sins. I had discovered a hidden secret during the divorce proceedings, one that would bring him to his knees. Late one evening, as I sat in my quiet home, I made the call I had been dreading but also eagerly anticipating. The voice on the other end was familiar, cold, and detached. "Martin, we need to talk." There was a long pause before he replied, his voice wary. "What do you want, Elaine?" "I want justice, Martin. I want you to pay for everything you've done." My words were deliberate, each one carrying the weight of my anger and determination. Martin chuckled, a mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can do anything to me now? I've lost it all, Elaine. What more could you possibly take from me?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I know about your hidden accounts, Martin, the offshore ones you thought were safe. I have the evidence, and I'm not afraid to expose you." Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I could hear the panic in his voice when he finally responded. "How did you?" "That's not important right now," I interrupted. "What matters is that I have the power to ruin you completely. The authorities will be very interested in those accounts, Martin." His voice trembled as he spoke, desperation creeping in. "What do you want, Elaine? Money? Is that what this is about?" I couldn't help but laugh. A bitter and vindictive sound. "Money won't fix the damage you've done, Martin. But it will ensure you suffer for a long time." I outlined my terms, a substantial portion of his hidden wealth to be transferred to me as compensation for the years of pain and betrayal. Martin had no choice but to agree, his voice defeated. As I hung up the phone, I felt a rush of satisfaction. Martin had lost everything, his job, his reputation, and now his secret wealth. He was a broken man, a shadow of his former self. But I had won. I had taken back control of my life, exposed him for the monster he was, and ensured that he would pay for his actions. It was a sweet victory, one that had been a long time coming. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own dignity and self-worth. I had emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient than ever. As I sat alone in my quiet home, I couldn't help but smile. The nightmare was finally over, and I was free to live my life on my terms. Martin's downfall was a satisfying end to a chapter of my life that I was more than ready to leave behind.